and therefore allow the CEO of SAPRA to then start introducing themselves and then present. I want to also thank them because I now know that they've got a full complement of their staff, something that they have always been indicating that they were not a full complement thereof. So if she can start there, then we take it the process. Thanks.
Honourable Kalomo, it's Professor Rees here, and if you allow me, I'm the chair of the board, and perhaps before we do the presentations, I will make some opening remarks to both the question of ivermectin and vaccines, but I'd like to introduce Dr. Tumi Semete. Perhaps not everybody has had the opportunity to meet Dr. Semete yet as the CEO, and she will introduce some of the executive who are with us. So I will just pause for quick introductions, and then I'll just make some opening comments if that's acceptable.
My apology, Professor Rees. I did not see you on my list here. I saw Boitumelo. Thank you very much. So maybe your name comes right at the bottom. I didn't see it. Thank you. Thank you for coming in, the chairperson of the board of SAPRA.
Thank you very much. So if it's acceptable, I'll ask Dr. Semete to introduce herself and her colleagues, and then I'll make some opening remarks.
Good morning, members of the Portfolio Committee, and again, thank you for having us this morning. My name is Dr. Boitumelo Semete, and I'm the CEO of SAPRA. I am joined in this meeting by our full executive team. We've got our HR executive, Mr. Gordon Tagati. We've got our Chief Operations Officer, Ms. Kristalna Reyneke. We've got our Board Secretary, Mr. Peter Ntoso. We also have our Chief Regulatory Officer, Ms. Posha Nkambule. And lastly, we've got our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Gerhard Groos. This is the full complement, and I'm quite pleased to say, members, that SAPRA now has a full complement of the executive, and we hope that as we now have the full team in place, we will be able to make good progress in terms of our mandate. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Semete. Back to Professor Rees now.
Thank you very much. And we are very grateful for this opportunity to present. And I understand that, you know, top of our mind is obviously the questions that you've raised, which are around ivermectin and vaccines, but obviously we're happy to talk about anything that's COVID related. And when we get an opportunity, we can come back and give you a bigger picture of progress overall in the regulatory authority. So I think before I start, I'm just going to give you a bit of a backdrop to ivermectin and to vaccines. So the first thing to say, and I think everyone is aware of this, is that the regulatory authority is tasked with ensuring the safety, quality, and efficacy of health products in South Africa, but in the context of our South African settings. So we always take into account not only the social context, but the medical context as we make decisions and recommendations. But safety is really very paramount in what we do. At the start of the COVID pandemic globally, and I've been involved with this work, we recognized that there would not be enough time to develop brand new drugs to address all of the aspects of COVID that we required. That's prevention and treatment of mild disease and serious disease and so on. So instead of that, there's been a global effort to look at old medicines and to do what we call repurpose them if they are suitable for any aspect of the management of COVID. So in that regard, a lot of work went in both looking at the molecules that we have, looking at how they perform and what are their characteristics. And in fact, globally, artificial intelligence has been used to sort through thousands and thousands and thousands of drugs to say which drugs look like they might have a possibility to actually have an impact on some aspect of COVID. For this reason, and if you remember right at the beginning, we were very excited about chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, both for prevention and treatment. But unfortunately, in the treatment realm where large studies have been done, it proved not to be effective. Similarly, interferon, we were very interested, but large studies didn't support that. We've looked at antiretroviral drugs that we use for HIV, lopinavir, ritonavir being one. Again, sadly, large studies didn't support that for treatment. And then the drug you will have heard about, remdesivir, which is also an antiviral. Larger studies, unfortunately, also haven't confirmed what we really did hope from smaller studies was going to be a significant impact. So against that background, this is where ivermectin had come in. It looked that it might well have antiviral activity in the laboratory. And it also looked as if it might have anti-inflammatory activities as well. And the spectrum of COVID disease starts with what the virus does, and that's when you need antivirals. But later on, and all of us are familiar with this now, when people become very ill, and an inflammatory process takes over. And here you need drugs like dexamethasone, a steroid, to dampen down that inflammatory process. So two different approaches and drugs needed for this entity. So it's against that background, and we'll present the data on ivermectin, that a number of very small studies have been done, and larger studies are in progress. The small studies either didn't show anything or showed some hopeful impact, but not sufficient for anybody to be able to say this definitely works. For that, you absolutely need large studies, and they have to be properly designed studies. Without that, you will not be able to interpret the data. And we've seen this, unfortunately, with, as I say, chloroquine, with interferon, with remdesivir. Small studies looked hopeful, big studies showed nothing. And this is extremely important in the way that regulators do their business. You have to have really good evidence. And the question of vaccines, and we'll go into the timelines and the registration timelines. As I'm sure you're all aware, we've concertinaed the average 10 to 11 years that it takes to develop a vaccine into less than a year. It's unprecedented. And we've done that by really overlapping the way that we do business. Some of these vaccines were already on the shelf, but we developed them, for example, for MERS and the original SARS, and they were taken off the shelf and repurposed. And other vaccines were being developed for platforms, just precisely for this scenario of a pandemic when we have an unknown virus coming out. So we were developing these platforms so that we could put a new virus, in this case, plug it onto that platform. So we did have some things in our cupboard at the start of the pandemic in terms of vaccines that we thought we could adapt quickly, and that's what we've seen. But what we also did is we took the different phases of the clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2, 2B, and 3, and we overlapped them. And because of that, we've consolidated the timeline into under a year, which is unprecedented. However, although we have a lot of safety data from the clinical trials, remember these large clinical trials at the end have tens of thousands of people in them. Safety is an incredibly important point to keep monitoring. With vaccines, some of the serious side effects that you see don't occur once in 1,000. They can occur once in 1,000,000. So you need to be rolling these vaccines out to millions of people, but monitoring for any safety signals. And Tumi will explain that to you, that we are very closely involved with that. And we're doing that as a global partner with the World Health Organization. And all these safety signals are then consolidated globally, because if we see anything at all that's serious, it's likely to be highly uncommon. So that's the backdrop to the vaccines. And Tumi has an entire presentation, and very, very happy to explain this to you in more detail, because I think understanding what the regulator's role is when it comes to something like ivermectin, and why there are almost two groups, doctors who strongly and passionately believe that this is working and that we need to have access, and another group who say this shouldn't be used. So somewhere in the middle, we have to have a regulatory decision that protects people's safety and is very careful about not declaring things effective if we do not have the evidence. Let me stop there, and I'll introduce Dr. Semete. Over to you.